Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory and the home and the traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, Dakota people, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in the Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this morning. Introducing panel members. To my left is Laurie Davidson, and via Zoom is Mr. Robert Hutchings. Our assessor this morning is Mr. Wong, and our recording secretary is Jaswinder Kumar. This morning we'll be hearing application for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we'll limit discussion to those matters. The statements that the applicant or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking in these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that the comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of the city administration. We make our decisions based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision in respect to application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board. The matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to acquire the Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to application from exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing this morning, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, we'll then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions and the other applicant may have. And then will be the applicant's testimony, followed by questions. Each party will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all applications or once all evidence about the applications brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this morning. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will probably be part of the public record. I ask that the secretary swear in the assessor, Mr. Wong, and probably confirm Mr. Kerry Lambert.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
I'm Wong.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. State your full name. Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you.
All right. We only have one item on the docket this morning, which is 70 Baylor Avenue. So, Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready, you can take us through this property.
Okay, and I just want to confirm that you can hear me reasonably well.
Yep.
Okay. The subject property is 70 Baylor. The roll number is 030-407-24100. It's a commercial row house. It's comprised of 17 buildings. I think the majority of the buildings were built in 1970. There are 90 suites with 90 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an exterior photo. On page 4 is our income valuation summary. They're comprised of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and mostly 3 bedrooms and a few 4 bedrooms. We use average rents of $1,236 for the class code 10 to get a potential of 192,000. We used the 4.2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of 184,000. We used a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of 93,000. For the class code 20, the same parameters were used to get a net operating income of 555,000. The total estimates of value for the class code 10 is 1,736,000, and for the class code 20 is 10,282,000. The total assessed value is 12,100,000 or 12,018,000. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents that we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 6 is a summary of the income and expenses from this property. Looking at their 2020 income and expenses, their NOI is 664,000, which is a little bit higher than what the model is at 648,000. So their actual performance supports the model and maybe supports a value slightly higher than the model. On page 7 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 8 are some cap rate sales. On page 9 is Altus cap rate information, indicating that the cap rate has gone down from 4.5% in 2017 to 4.3% in 2020. On page 10 is some Altus cap rate information, indicating our cap rate was 4.5% in 2017. So believe that these cap rates support the cap rate that we've used for today. The remainder of my brief is the income and expense questionnaires submitted by the property owner. Once again, all that is summarized on my page 6. So the actual performance of the property supports the model. The cap rate is supported by the market. That being the case, I ask that you maintain the assessed value at 12,018,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Reimer, questions of the assessor?
Indeed, yes. And so to preface my questions, the sole issue under examination, under debate this morning is going to be cap rate. So there's going to be no questions as to the model-generated NOI for reasons that will become very clear when I make my presentation. So with that in mind, Mr. Wong, could we turn initially to your page 7?
Yes.
So just to be very clear, in the 2 columns that says City of Winnipeg, April 1, 2021, and then there's a multifamily segment. That's the range of cap rates that the departments produced between in theory, leaving out the outliers being the low of the 20th percentile and the high of the 80th percentile, ranging between 4.8 and 5.6.
Yes,
And that's the model range. Whatever the data was that was fed into it, that's what the model has provided as the range, correct?
yes.
Okay. So if we could turn then to page 8. Now, so you've got a list of sales here, and sale number, or sorry, the second sale, 510 Burnell. Were you aware that that sale involves a building that transacted involving a former property manager and person that had an interest in the building?
I'm not aware of those details.
Okay. With respect to, and it's going to be sales, the 4th and 5th, 1833 Pembina and 859 Grosvenor. Those sales transacted on the same date. It's clearly set out in the chart. Were you aware that was part of a portfolio sale? It was both properties being sold contemporaneously to the same, by the same vendor to the same purchaser.
I was not aware of that, but
Okay.
as far as I can tell, it seems like it was a fair sale price. So,
Well, I'll have something to say about that as far as the IAA standards with portfolio sales. I think they do have concerns, but you're certainly entitled to your opinion. With respect to number 3, with respect to 700 St. Mary's and 203 Bertrand, those, and it's obvious, but just to be clear, those are sales of much smaller properties of only 9 suites in those 2 instances, correct?
correct.
And just to remind the board, our property has a total of 90 units in this roll number, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And then lastly, the very first sale, 2390 McPhillips. Based on the sale price, well, I should take a half step back. That's not a fair question. Are you familiar with the materials that were published by the broker, the commercial broker to market the property? And if you're not, that's okay. It's just, I'll have something further to say. So if it's not a fair question, if you don't know, that's fine.
I vaguely am familiar with it, but not enough to maybe speak too much about it.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So then moving on to page 9. These are the, as noted at the top, the national markets, a graph showing the national market trends. And you'd agree, I mean, I believe it's obvious, but certainly the national market encompasses transactions and trends from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast in Canada. Would that seem reasonable?
Yes.
And that in turn would include the very different and very unique markets in places like Toronto and Vancouver. I'm assuming you would agree with that as well.
Possibly.
No, I'm going to suggest it is. Not possibly. I'm going to suggest it is absolutely. And I'm also going to suggest, Mr. Wong, in those markets, we can agree that Toronto and Vancouver are many times larger than Winnipeg, correct?
Yes.
And so with there's throughout the past several years, for many years now, particularly in Vancouver and more recently and leading up to the reference date in Toronto, certainly the indicators, are you aware of the indicators in those 2 markets relative to the rest of the country and the trends there?
As far as I can tell, their cap rates are a little bit low, but and that's why I put in the page 10 of my brief is like that is the cap rate report that was presented for Winnipeg. And,
Oh, sure.
And in 2017, that was 4.5%. And for the national report in 2017, the cap rate was 4.5%. So I just want to show that the national trends are similar to what we might be experiencing in Winnipeg,
Okay,
overall.
so to be clear, going back to your page 9, you're not in any way suggesting that the number that's showing there is relevant to our market, but you're trying to show that the trend is consistent with what the department's seeing in the Winnipeg market generally. Is that a fair conclusion?
Well, I think it's similar to what the Winnipeg market is experiencing, as indicated on page 10.
Okay, so that your answer is yes, then, as I take it. What you're trying to do, because this is a national study and markets that have been unbelievably overheated leading up to the reference date in Toronto and Vancouver. And I'd suggest to you, Mr. Wong, those are massive markets that would involve a whole bunch of transactions that would color this graph. You're not suggesting that the numbers on this graph on page 9, forget about page 10 for a second. On page 9, you're not suggesting these numbers because of those, because of the effect of all those transactions in these very different markets. You're not suggesting the conclusions here would apply directly to Winnipeg, but rather a trend, correct?
It could indicate what is happening in Winnipeg, because I mean, when you talk about Vancouver and Toronto, it's not just Vancouver and Toronto. I mean, Vancouver and Toronto may affect the cap rates a little bit lower, but there might be some other parts of the country that affect the cap rates a little bit higher. But in the end, the cap rate seems to be indicative of what Winnipeg is experiencing.
Okay, Mr. Wong, which properties were included in the study on page 9?
I don't know.
Where were the properties located?
I don't know any of the details, so I'll say.
Okay, so how many of the properties were similar in age to the subject?
Once again, I will save you the trouble and say that I don't know the details of those sales.
All right, thank you. Let's move to page 10. So, Mr. Wong, this is a graph that you've taken from the submission of Altus to the Winnipeg Real Estate Forum, correct?
Yes.
And it was in May of 2018?
Yes.
Okay, we can agree though that the valuation date, whatever else is going on with the chart, we can agree that the valuation date is April 1, 2021 for the subject, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so now again, my starting question would be a couple of questions. We can agree at the very least, that this chart ends in 2017 and has no indication as to what happened between 2017 and April 1, 21, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware of what properties were used for the purposes of deriving the figures, the statistical figures, the aggregate statistical figures in this chart?
No.
So we're not sure if or how many might have been purchased for renovation, correct?
As far as I can tell, the indicated cap rates are capitalization rates. And so with regards to the details in that, I'm not really too sure. But in the end, the cap rates that were indicated were 4.5%.
Okay, but I will ask this again. How many of the properties, do you know any of the properties that were included in the aggregate statistics to come up with the 4.5%?
I do not.
Okay. So you don't know how many of them were bought for renovation purposes, correct? I mean, it seems like a trite question, but if you're saying you don't know the properties,
the details, but this is what the indicated cap rate was, and I'm pretty sure Altus would not put out in something that was not representative.
I entirely agree, Mr. Wong, but it depends entirely on the data set that's being used. You do not know anything about that data set, correct? Just to summarize.
I do not know anything about the data set. I do know that the indicated cap rate is 4.5% in 2017.
Okay, so then let's go back. Since you put that evidence in though, let's go back to your page 7. Now on page 7, if you recall, my question to you was relating to the capitalization rate for multifamily and the 20th percentile. So at the very low end of what the range would be, leaving out theoretically the outliers. That low end was 4.8%, correct?
Yes.
So then based on your evidence, Mr. Wong, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that cap rates have gone up when your own model is showing a low of 4.8% relative to the 2017 chart on page 10, that shows 4.5%. So actually, it would appear that cap rates have gone up by about 30 basis points in that period.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, you're comparing different sets of information, and
That's my very point, Mr. Wong.
the thing is, the indications. These are the cap rates that are indicated by these sales. The Altus cap rates, the Altus chart is just indicating what their calculated cap rate is. I mean, if you're going to try to compare them, I don't think you can. But the thing is, when you at the very end, the indicated cap rate from the Altus chart is 4.5, and the cap rates from our model indicate 4.8 to 5.6 within the 60th percentiles for the 20th and 80th percentiles.
As of April 1, 2021, correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wong, I'm losing you here. I think the volume turned down a little bit. So the cap rates, again, I'm not going to belabor this anymore, but the 20th percentile of the cap rate, according to department's data as of April 1, 21 was 4.8%, correct?
Yes.
No more questions, Mr. Chairman. I'll have more to say later. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Davidson.
Oh, that was a lot of good information. I guess I had a couple of questions. Firstly, this is kind of basic, but I'm just trying to get a sense of this building. So it's like a res 1 and a res 2, but they would be detached, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some buildings that have 4 units or less, and then there are some buildings that have 5 units or more. And that's,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, and then I was looking at the year. It said the year, both the effective and the built year was 1970 to 2008. So was it built in stages, like add-ons, or?
I'm not sure. I think there might have been, I'm not sure. Sometimes when this happens, there might be like one building that was built, like maybe a small building that was built later, and that's why that range is there. But I think the majority of the units were built in 1970.
Sorry, in 1970?
Is that?
Sorry?
Yeah, 1970.
So that's the major part, like the res 2 would have been 1970.
Maybe actually, like I said, there might have been a small building or something that was added on later, fairly like in 2008. But I think generally speaking, the majority of the units were built in 1970.
Okay, so there hasn't been any significant renovations because you're showing the effective year the same, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because the you can see it's 1970 to 2008, and then the effective year is 1970 to 2008. If there was a effective year inputted, it'd be reflected in the effective year built numbers or years.
Okay, so that gives me a better sense of what the building is like. And I noted that 2/3 of the suites are 3-bedroom, which I guess is, you know, quite a few suites.
Yeah.
When I look at comparables.
Yeah, the majority of them are 3 bedrooms.
Okay, then really the other question is everything based on modeling, including the choosing of the comparables, etc., or was there an inspection? Was there any kind of fine tuning to pick comparables?
No, I selected the comparables, and I selected them based off of them being, I guess, a similar row house and construction and a suite mix.
Okay, because I noted only, I think it was, I don't have the page up in front of me. 2 of the comparables only were in the Pembina or that South Winnipeg area.
Yeah, I think to try to get exact comparables within the subject area, it would be sometimes it's extremely difficult. Sometimes they don't exist, and so looking outside the area at commercial row houses that are built at approximately the same time, these are the comparables that were available.
Yes, just the last question is this type of res 1, res 2 row house. it seems, is it unique? Like, I mean, like in terms of finding comparables, like it's only 2-3 stories and it's got 3 bedrooms, like it seems unique, but that may not be the case. I'm just wondering in terms of comparables, whether even outside the area, there might have been something that was more comparable in terms of type of property, like year and suite type.
Like in terms of my comparables?
Yeah.
I don't know if you look on my page 5.
Yeah, I'm there now.
The year builds are similar. The construction is similar.
Mhm.
The suites are, I mean, there's a decent number of 3 bedrooms, and so I guess it seems to me that they're pretty comparable.
Okay, which one do you think is the most, or which 1 or 2 are most comparable in your view?
I mean, it looks like maybe the larger ones, but I would say all of them are because
So you're not relying more on one or the other.
Sorry.
Okay, and just the cap rate was a modeled rate from your side, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wong, in regards to the property, has there been any recent inspections?
I'm not aware.
Okay, thank you. And on the declared income and expense statements, the maintenance per unit is about approximately $2,100 per unit. Would that be considered average expenditure for per unit on this style of property?
I would normally consider maybe a range from about $500 per unit to about maybe $2,000 per unit.
Okay.
This one is about $2,000 or more, like you're indicating 2,100. I think that's within the norm for some of these buildings, or some of these parcels which contain multiple buildings, which this property does. I think from my experience, they tend to experience some more repair and maintenance costs. So for me, the 2,100 seems like it's fairly reasonable.
Okay, so that would be, you would consider that a good amount to spend to keep the property up to date?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, that's my only question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Wong, I just have a couple of questions. On page 8, you presented a cap study, but the subject property has got 90 units. So
Yes.
I don't know why you'd have a cap study here that is only applicable to number 1, the comparable on McPhillips, and number 4, which is on Pembina Highway, which are close to the subject property. So, how can you throw in units that are a lot smaller? Because that's going to probably distort the cap rate, I would say. Would you agree with me or not?
Maybe not.
Okay, that's your opinion.
Yeah. It's just like I don't say that to.
Okay. No,
yeah,
it's
just based
just
on
interesting.
my own observations.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I mean, like if you're, you have apples and oranges, you don't have, one specific type of a unit or, larger units.
Yeah. I think for us to try to find or present cap rates that are specific to that are exact good cap rates for every property that we are going to have an appeal for this cycle, I think that would be I would say it's impossible. But for us to be able to provide cap rates that support and substantiate our model,
Down to be specific for the subject property.
Pardon me?
I'm looking at the larger units. And the rate, the cap rate is say 4.8, and the other one is 4.5. Yet, you come along with the model of using 5.4. So,
Yeah, the property, I mean, the unit sizes are different, but when you look at the age of the property, like a 1970 property compared to, say, a 2015 property, you can say that those larger sales with cap rates being 4.7 and 4.46, that supports the model at 5.4, because you can say that those cap rates support the 5.4% that the model is used for the subject property.
All right. Just one other question, and that is in regards to, and I can't seem to find it here, right? But I know it's here. And that is in regards to your historical cap rate. And it ended at 2017, whereas, we have a V-Day of April the 1st, 2021. So why wouldn't you, come up to that date if you're going to include it in your report?
The report is, I guess, the most recent information we have, and it went up to 2017. It's just indicating that the cap rate in 2017 was 4.5%. If you look at the page 9, the Altus national trend, the cap rate for the Altus national trend is 4.5. But the thing is, the national trend extends all the way up to 2022, or it goes to 2020. And the indicated cap rate in 2020 is 4.3%. So I was just trying to link something that was a little bit older to something that's a little bit more recent.
All right, I thank you. Mr. Reimer, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start by, I do want to highlight some things, and actually, Mr. Wong identified the problem very precisely with respect to these charts that he's put in. Recall that I asked him, well, doesn't this show that from 2017, this Winnipeg chart, that there's been a 30 basis point increase from 4.5 to 4.8, which is the department's own data at the 20th percentile, the very low end. And Mr. Wong's answer was correct. You can't do that. It's two different bases for calculating caps. That's my very point. Those charts, Mr. Wong and we don't have any data. This is Mr. Wong's evidence. It's got no data as to if these properties were rehabbed, what the ages of the properties were, how the income was stabilized. They're just not relevant. And I'd ask the board to disregard the Winnipeg chart. And then going further, when you've got a national chart that includes markets like Toronto and Vancouver, when it was very well known what was happening in those markets through the late teens and going into the reference date, it just simply has no relevance. Then I'm going to ask the board briefly now to turn to page 8, and you're all on screens. I've got the paper copy in front of me, so I was going to ask you to circle some things, but I'll just ask you to take a note of it.
Sorry, you mean page 8 on
Page
yours?
8, no, right now, page 8 of the department, so
Yeah,
Mr. Wong's
back to
screen.
that, sorry.
So that's the cap rate chart. And Mr. Merritt, you brought up some very good questions. I'm agreeing with Mr. Wong to this extent that it's difficult to find very specific transactions around certain parameters because there just are not enough transactions. So I'm very sort of sympathetic to Mr. Wong's position that way, and we're in the same boat. But I am going to say this, and there's going to be a brief rebuttal. But if you look at sale number 1, these are the two buildings that are closest in size. That year built in effective age is 2015. So I'm suggesting the 2015 asset that's trading would be much, much different than the 1970 asset. Ms. Davidson brought up some very good questions, and I'm going to address those as well as to the nature of the asset. But then secondly, this one on Pembina, and this is where I was going to ask the board to circle one of the cells. The original year built for that property is 1972, very similar to the subject. But here's a huge but in that one. The effective age is 1999. That indicates, and it was Mr. Wong had made the comments to Ms. Davidson with the subject. There has been obviously no such upgrades. This property has had serious upgrades, which of course has the effect of taking out of rent control and then having a different method to basically closer to market to set your rents for the property. So very, very different asset. I have further concerns with that transaction because it's involved with portfolio sale, and I'm going to bring that to the board's attention later. So I did want to draw the board's attention to these things. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong now to turn to our first brief for the property. Let me know when you're there. Mr. Wong and Mr. Hutchings, you're good?
Yes.
Okay, so if I could turn briefly to page 2. So this is we're certainly in agreement on the characteristics of the property. There are quite a number of 3 bedrooms. It's primarily 2 and 3 bedrooms, a few 4s, and a few 1 bedrooms. We're asking this morning for the assessment, total assessment, to be reduced to $11,736,000. By the way, we've just valued it as an entire economic unit without reference to code 10 or code 20 that the department's applied. It's all just the same economic asset, and so we've just applied the one rate. And of course, it has no difference in taxes. The portioning and the mill rates are precisely the same for residential 1 and residential 2. So I want to address Ms. Davidson's question very briefly. If I could ask everyone to turn to our page 4. So this property, I'm sure the board is aware, but this is a property in Fort Richmond on Baylor Avenue, close to the university. Improvements were almost all built in 78. Ms. Davidson, I'm going to address your question more precisely right away. And there's a total 90 units, and the map is shown, the aerial view, I should say, is shown on page 4. So as you can see, and as Mr. Wong alluded to, there are multiple buildings on site. I appreciate Mr. Wong's candor as to the repairs and maintenance, and that's part of our submission as well. That certainly when you've got multiple units, as we do here, that is in the long run certainly going to result in higher repair and maintenance costs. I want to now, and I'm going to jump just a little bit, but I do want to address Ms. Davidson's question. So if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to our page 14, please. So starting at page 14, and Ms. Davidson's question was, how much of this was built in the 70s, and because the age range shows from 70 to 2008, which is absolutely correct. But if you start on page 14 and you go through pages 15, 16, and 17, and 18, all of those, this is basically showing all the different construction, all built in 1970s. So the only the only improvements that were constructed in 2008 are shown in the last 2 buildings on page 19. So to answer your question, Ms. Davidson, the overwhelming majority were built in 1970. There are 2 buildings shown on the very last page of all of the building information that shows the construction in 2008. So I'll leave that with you to review further if you wish, but that was sort of to give you a sense of the future construction on this property. So I'll ask the board now to turn to our page 7. What we're suggesting this morning for a capitalization rate is 5.75%. This property in our starting point is in the chart that's shown in the middle of page 7, and we've broken it down using a stratification based on both age and number of stories. So for the purposes of the subject being between 2 and 3 stories and being built in 1970, we're in basically the middle row where it's 1960 to 1998 construction, 1 to 5 stories in our base rate. And we would consider this a good location, so our base rate would be 5.5%. That's actually not far off of what the department's got at 5.4%. So the starting points are actually quite close. However, here's the however. We of course will consider site-specific adjustments. Now, in this case, the building type and construction, we're suggesting it will represent in the long run a higher risk because the buildings are really spread out over the property. There's multiple buildings on site. The parking now, Ms. Davidson had alluded to the fact that there's a high proportion of 3 bedrooms, and that's absolutely right. There's mostly 2 and a lot of 3 bedrooms, some 4. So imagine that when you've got a property of this kind, you can imagine that there's pretty significant family units living in these larger units, and a 1-to-1 parking ratio in the context of these units is a detractor. It's a negative factor in this case. So that would result in our submission consideration for an increased cap rate. The reverse of that, or the converse of that, though, is a sweet mix, because of course, with the pandemic, with things that were going on, the larger units would be the units that were going to be more attractive, because people were certainly looking to, perhaps some extended family members were moving into the same units, and the 2, 3, 4 bedroom units would be a positive influence, we suggest, for this property. Here for us, though, the clincher for me specifically was the supply and demand. And I'm going to refer the board to this shortly, but there was a significantly elevated vacancy of 10.2% as of April 1, 2021, due to COVID. And recall that this property is close to the university. And of course, with the shutdowns, the university was online, not 100%, but very close to 100%. And that had a direct impact on the demand for this property. And certainly with the pandemic being still very much front and center as of April 1, 2021, we do suggest that presents a risk factor in this case. So our final analysis comes in. We're suggesting, given all of those factors, both positive and negative, we're suggesting a rate of 5.75%. So then, if we could go to our page 9. So on our page 9, if you recall, I had prefaced my questions with the statement that our NOI was actually higher than the model NOI derived by the department. And at the bottom of page 9, you can see that I agree with Mr. Wong's comments that the model income of 648 is actually a little low relative to the performance of the property, and I agree. We've actually got an NOI of 674, 792, higher still than what Mr. Wong had in his evidence. So we're certainly trying to be very fair. Now, if you go up along our stabilized column, we are still applying, notwithstanding the comments of the owner that I'm going to refer the board to in a minute, we're still applying the model rate of market vacancy, the model rate of 4.2%. However, we are suggesting the cap rate needs to reflect the risk for this property in the economic conditions of April 1, 2021. So applying the 5.75% to our higher NOI of 674, 792, we come in at a suggested value this morning of 11,736,000 rounded. So I'm going to, prior to getting into the cap rate study, I'm going to just ask the board to go to our page 23, please. I feel like I'm living in the 80s. You guys are all on your computers and I'm talking to pages.
Yeah, but you're faster. At least
Well, that's an important point. If I'm going too fast.
no, I just meant you're
Okay.
the old school and you're faster.
23, did you say?
Yeah, it should be the first COVID supplemental page. I hope that's the right reference number. Just get to the one here. Yeah. So on page 23, this is the COVID supplemental questionnaire that was submitted, and it talks about, I mean, it's a subjective question to indicate the extent to which COVID has impacted the property, and they say significant impact. And then I'm going to ask the board to just go 2 pages further on page 25. And this is the reason for that opinion in this case. And at the bottom of this, they talk about, this is a significant multifamily residential property owner. They're a sophisticated owner. So they provided, from their perspective, what the impact of COVID was and some of the issues they were having. And at the bottom of that, they state, and this is actually a 12-month period from April 1 of 20 to March 31st of 21. So right up to the reference date, they calculated the vacancy and it increased from 4.6% to 10.2% over the 2-year period. So,
Sorry, what page are we on?
page 25. Sorry, Mr. Wong, did I lose you there?
Yeah, of the cap rate or your brief?
I know our brief.
Okay.
Let me know when you get there, Mr. Wong.
Yeah, I was looking at page 25 of the cap rate and it just wasn't jiving.
I know I'm confusing in my presentation, but that would have been awful. That would have been worse still.
Yeah. Okay.
So Mr. Wong, if you go roughly halfway down that page, what I was referring to was the statement as to the increase in the vacancy between 12-month period ending March 31st, 20 and the 12-month period ending March 31st, 2021. And it's gone from 4.6% to 10.2 in that period. And that, Mr. Chairman, is the basis of the suggestion in our chart earlier in the brief that certainly would be a risk factor that would need to be accounted for, and we've done so with the 5.75%. So now I'm going to ask the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to our capitalization rate study. And when you've got the study open, could you please initially turn to page 5? Let me know when you get there.
Sorry, that's the next submission, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Okay.
So on page 5, I'm asking the board to disregard 2 of the sales based on the submissions of the department and viewed their points. And as a result of our review of what they had brought to our attention, please disregard the second sale, which is 203 Yale Avenue East. If you can disregard that, please disregard the sale at 1139 grand. Those 2. So with that then in mind, if we could go back to page 2 of the study. And at the bottom of page 2, we've got some market reports, and I stressed this. We're not asking this board to look at the numbers there, which are from generally from 5% to 6%. We're not suggesting those numbers should be relied upon in the same way that I suggested to Mr. Wong. He can't rely on general information in his charts. This is the same thing. But what we are doing with this chart is to present what appears to be trends. So you can see there's 2 sets of columns. One is Q1 of 2018, which is the prior valuation date, reference date, and Q1 of 2021, which is the reference date we're dealing with. And as you go through that chart, what the general trends for most properties from brokers, there were a lot of 0% changes, so no change in between the 2 reference dates, and there were some properties that had a 25 basis point compression. So that certainly is part of what we looked at when we came up with our final suggestions. Then moving to page 3, we talk about some of the factors affecting cap rates. And I've alluded to some of these. The building type and construction, multi-building site, not ideal. Heritage status, not relevant in this case. Building amenities, I didn't make an adjustment one way or another. Durability and quality of income. Certainly to the extent that there is a question as to whether the income you're generating is stable, that is going to be a risk factor if you conclude it isn't. And recall that it was the COVID questionnaire. The property was certainly the performance of the property and the durability of the income was a little bit in question based on those economic circumstances. Age, 1970. It's certainly not new by any stretch. It hasn't been a lot of work other than the 2 buildings built in 2008. But with our base rate, we factored that as the 1970 was in that stratification that we've got. So we didn't make an adjustment for that. Condition, average condition, so no adjustment. Parking, I'm suggesting that's a negative here because these are large units. that would be typically inhabited by significant sized families, and the parking of only a 1-to-1 ratio. I don't believe that is ideal for a property like this. Turning into the next page, page 4, suite mix, and I alluded to this. The suite mix in this case is actually a positive influence, a whole bunch of 3 bedrooms, several 2 bedrooms, a few 4 bedrooms, a few 1 bedroom. Number of suites, our property is at 90. And what you're going to see though, in our capitalization rate is we simply didn't have the data for a 90 unit building. So that could potentially be a factor, but it's not going to enter the discussion this morning for me. Supply and demand, or sorry, locational and external factors and supply and demand. And I just kind of link these two because economic conditions, that relates to the environment we were all working with and through as of April 1, 2021, which is a very exceptionally difficult environment in the sort of pandemic era. And so you had that market and those circumstances, along with the location of this building, with where it typically relies on, has quite a bit of turnover, but it relies on students from the University of Manitoba. That virtually dried up. And so you've got, because of the pandemic, university closure affecting supply and demand pretty significantly for this property. We believe that was a negative risk factor in this case. So then turning to page 5, with the properties after disregarding, and I repeat again, please disregard Yale, please disregard Grant. So then we've got 535 Victor, 555 Corden, 677 Maryland, and 32 Arden. And as shown there, the capitalization rates range from 5.42% to 6.85%. Victor Street, we know, was remodeled, and the sale price, and this is very important. The sale date is actually the date on which it transferred at land titles. What I'm going to show the board, though, the sale date and the sale price was known as of December 20, and that rate was available to certainly any real estate agent who would be looking at that property. And in the same manner that one can go to land titles and get the transaction data, all of the agents and their clients could get that same sale data as of December 20, because that's the date in which the property actually sold, notwithstanding that the transfer of land only happened in June. So based on these capitalization rates, based on the our suggestion is to the positive and negatives in this particular case, we're suggesting a rate of 5.75%. And what we've got, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail. Appendix A, we have some concerns with the way the model seemed to be generating very, very different cap rates for assets that normally would be considered very similar. And you can see it's just a publication of several of the rates we found, and it's really there's no, as far as we can tell, there's no rhyme or reason as to what's happening based on the model. And this is not Mr. Long, this is just the model taking out some numbers that just seem very odd. We've got then starting at page 12, and again I stress we've got the broker market reports there to show trends and trends only, not to be relied upon for the specific numbers and the specific cap rate percentages that they're talking about. If I could ask the board to turn into page, I'm going to skip over a number of pages. By all means, if the board members want to look at the study or the broker information and CMHC information, I leave it with you. But in the interest of expediency, I'll skip to page 35. So on page 35, this is a chart of the sources the CMHC starts and completion survey. And this is Winnipeg specific, and note the huge spike in rental apartment units versus condos. So the rental units were clearly going up, and there has, leading up to the reference date, there certainly has been significant construction. That at the end of the day is going to place further strain on some of these properties because of the very much a lot higher or a lot more choice, I should say, when the projects are completed. That, if anything, might exacerbate the concerns they've expressed in the COLI questionnaire. But I'm going to be fair here. an individual around the university, an individual or a student that can afford what would anticipate to be much higher rents in, for these brand new units is not likely the same market that historically has occupied the subject. And of course, those units that are being built aren't these 2 and 3 story townhouse style units are either. So while it generally would be an indicator of very much increased supply, that factor I'm suggesting wouldn't be huge because the market for this property is different, but that market had dried up because it was the university. It was the university market, and of course they were not in person at the time. So then, starting at page 40, we've from page 40 through to virtually the end of the study, up to the last 4 pages of the study. This is the information we've supplied in support of our capitalization rate submission. So I'm going to turn to very specific pages just to draw the board's and Mr. Wong's attention to how we calculated the cap rate. So page 40 itself, this is our the derivation of our cap rate for 555 Victor, and it shows, as you can see there, a stabilized NOI of 63,000 and a cap rate, an NOI of 77,811 and a cap rate of 6.85%. Do note, and this is important, we stabilized the repairs and maintenance in line 27 at $1,000 a unit. The pro forma was based on what I believe to be a really optimistic stabilized expense that's at 7,000. This property was built in 1914, and I suggest in no uncertain terms, if you're spending $500 a suite on a 1914 building, that is an asset that is going to be wasting in very short order. It's just not possible for it to be kept up in a reasonable manner for a building that's that old. So we have taken the $1,000, which we consider to be at the very low end of a stabilized repair and maintenance expense, especially for buildings of this vintage. So we've used that figure in our calculations. Then, turning to page 47, please. This is the property at 555 Corridon. Again, you can see for the board's information, we've derived a stabilized NOI of 90,187 and a cap rate of 5.73%. And just in quick math on my head, so we've stabilized the repairs and maintenance at roughly just to take under $1,500 a month for this 1955 building. We believe would be reasonable. We have excluded that sale, so I'm not going to refer to that. I ask the board members to turn to page 76 now, please. This building has a 1972 variant age, but 1913 original construction, so obviously substantial work done. We've calculated a stabilized NOI here, 135,777. And resulting in an indicated cap rate of 5.66%. Now here we have actually stabilized the repairs and maintenance at 885 a suite, and that would have been a function of the significant work that had already been done, and therefore is resulting in a somewhat lower stabilized repairs and maintenance expense. Finally, if I could ask the board members to go on page 85. This is 32 Arden. Shown there, we calculate a stabilized NOI of 155,873, resulting in an indicated cap of 5.42%. Again, this is a building that has a significant variant age difference, 1985 versus 1969 original age, and so clearly there's also been quite a bit of work done on that property. Mr. Chairman, I have brief rebuttal. Would you like me to go through that now?
Right, well,
Okay,
I'm going to transfer that to you. Mr. Wong, I just sent you the rebuttal from the applicant.
Okay.
so just let me know when it's there. Yep.
Mr. Hatching is in the share folder.
Okay, thank you. I have it, thank you.
are you okay?
No,
No.
what is it called?
Um,
Bottom.
no,
Oh,
You got it?
no,
no,
Okay, just one second.
he'll come and see you.
sure.
I don't think it's there yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll go to the agenda. The agenda.
I know it's not that folder.
He didn't bring extra copies, eh?
I didn't, I can come sit over there, we can look at it. You know, and I think of it too, that maybe I should,
No, I didn't mean it that way, just like,
Yeah, no, I,
always the dependence.
Okay, it's there now.
I got it.
There.
Is that under my folders?
refreshing. So, yeah.
Oh, I came to the top, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. All right, Carrie.
Thank you.
Mr. Hutchings, Mr. Wong, you're there as well?
Yes,
Sorry, where, are we on a certain page or?
No, not yet, just the document itself.
Yeah, yeah, I have it.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, recall in my questions to Mr. Wong, I expressed concern with two of the properties that transacted on the same date, 1833 Pembina and 859 Grosvenor. If I could ask the board members, Mr. Wong, to turn to page 2, and this is the IAA standards relating to cap rates and cap rate calculations. And the highlighted section in the middle of page 2, multiple parcel sales, which is what that transaction was, it was multiple parcels. Just states a multiple parcel sales, if it's a transaction involving more than one parcel of real property, and then goes on to state in the second paragraph, regardless of whether the parcels are contiguous, which in this case they're not, but even if they would be contiguous, any multiple parcel sale that involves multiple economic units generally should not be used in valuation or ratio studies. That's the concern we have with those two. They are being used by the department, but we don't believe, based on the IAA's total standard, that that's advisable. On page 3, this is the confirmation of the transaction being, we'd already known it, but the transaction being from the same vendor is well known in this community. And at the bottom, it talks about the transaction that occurred for those two properties. I'm going to leave it at that. Starting at page 5, sorry, page 6. This is
Which one are you on?
page 6 of the rebuttal.
Okay,
This is the, I asked, in my questions, I asked Mr. Long if he is familiar with the broken materials, and he very barely said not very much. So I just want to bring this to the board's attention. This is the property relating to 2390 McPhillips, the new building, 2015 build that sold. And the only, and I say this with caution, but if you turn to page, and my page numbers didn't do it. Okay. How about this? So page 5, 6, 7. Turn to page 8 of the rebuttal. And I'm hoping, maybe Mr. Mayor, if you can confirm, it looks like that.
yep,
Okay. So on page 8, on the right-hand side, it says offering details, and the list price that was there at the time was $20,440,000. The sale price was basically $1 million lower at $19,400,000. If you look just under that sale offering price, the total stabilized NOI that they've calculated is $970,869. If you take that publish stabilized NOI and you work it through with the actual sale price, the indicated cap is 5%. Here's where I'm cautious though, and I do throw this caution out, because if you recall, I alluded earlier to the fact that one of the performance for one of our sale comparables indicated a repairs and maintenance expense that for us certainly struck us as very much on the low side. Real estate agents, commercial agents, they certainly can't mislead. They have to be professional in their duties, but there's different ways to come up with a stabilized NOI depending on the assumptions you have. And so I don't know what lies behind the 970,000 stabilized NOI. I'm taking that number at face value, but please just be aware that without knowing more about that number, it's very difficult to tell what in our methodology we would apply. But I do bring it to the board's attention just as a reference that the cap rate, the department's calculated 4.79%. If you take the 970,000 published NOI, it actually would be 5%. Those are my very lengthy comments. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Wong, questions of the applicant?
I'll just with regards to the article for the properties that for the Pembina property and the Grosvenor property.
Yes.
Did the article indicate that 859 Grosvenor sold for $7 million?
It does, yeah.
And did it indicate that 1833 Pembina sold for $22.5 million?
Absolutely. No question.
So those are the sale prices for the properties, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's not in dispute.
No, and I guess for our cap rate studies, we applied that sale price against the stabilized income statements that we have for those properties, and that's how we calculated the cap rates. So that would be my only question regarding the rebuttal.
Questions, Mr. Rowe?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Sorry.
I just have I'm sure you've said this. So that obviously you differ on the cap rate. You've gone through a lot of evidence from your perspective, as did the assessor. But you used a different NOI too.
We used a higher NOI.
Yeah. What was that primarily attributable to again? I
Well,
just looked at a lot of numbers.
Yeah, no, and I
Like,
appreciate
was it the
that.
maintenance or I can't remember.
So here's the difficulty, and it's a very good question, actually. I ask the board members and Mr. Wong to go back to our main brief on page 9. Let me know when you're there.
I'm there.
If they both get, I'll eventually get there.
I'm there. It took me a while, but I'm
Yeah,
there.
if you don't mind.
Mr. Atkins, are you good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good.
Which page you?
Page 9.
So this is our, Ms. Davidson, this is our valuation. So if you start at the top, or not the top, but let's go to effective gross income, roughly in the middle. Our effective gross income is about just over $20,000 higher. And then though, further, if you go all the way down, our total expenses are $625,000. But your question was, is there a difference in repairs and maintenance and such? I don't know, because the only values that the department provides is a total expense number. And Mr. Wong, if I'm speaking out of turn here, let me know, but I believe the expense number, the overall expense ratio is a function of the model based on characteristics, age, location, and such. If I'm wrong in that, please correct me. But
I think maybe the question regarding the repair and maintenance, what the difference is, it's basically comparing the model versus the income and expenses provided by the for the subject property. So that's the main difference. It's like the value estimate that the city has provided is model driven, and so it doesn't look at the exact expense exact numbers for every property. it's an estimate based off of all the information that we get.
Yeah,
If we were to try to-
exactly. So Ms. Davidson, to go back to your question, our total expenses are actually a little bit lower. Part of that might be to the model, assuming a slightly higher repairs and maintenance, but it's not clear. It may even be a bit of an uptick on utilities or something else. At the end of the day, our expenses are actually quite close to the modeled expenses, but we're even still lower. And that then at the end of the day results in the higher NOI, about 27 grand.
Yeah, it wasn't very much. And I can see why you can't compare every
Yeah,
detail. Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
That was probably more information than you wanted.
That's okay.
Mr. Reimer, are you finished with your
Yes.
presentation? Mr. Wong, questions? Anything further?
Yeah, just I guess with regards to the cap rate study,
Yes.
let me see if I can find it. I guess on page 5. So is everybody on page 5?
Yes.
I guess with regards to the cap rate sales that you're using for 535 Victor, 555 Corden, 677 Maryland, 32 Arden, are any of those row houses?
No. No. These are the properties on which we had sufficient data to complete the cap analysis.
Okay. Okay. And I guess going back to your brief on page 7, I'll wait for you guys to go there. Your main brief. Is everybody there?
Yes.
Okay. I get at the bottom of your page 7.
Yes.
I guess you had made some adjustments regarding the building type construction, the parking, the suite mix, and the supply and demand.
Yes.
You were saying earlier that there's limited sales in the city.
Certainly that's been our experience, yeah, or at least where we have the data.
Yeah. How are you able to, like with so little sales, how are you able to substantiate these adjustments that you're making with regards to their building type, or whether an imperfect parking count affects the cap rate? How are you able to, I guess, substantiate that?
So are you asking what kind of math I performed? Like how I
are you able to, yes, if there are so limited sales, how are you able to substantiate it with sales or with numbers?
Sure, the sales data that we have, it's in, as I show on page 5 of the cap study, the sales data where we have the data ranges from between 5.42 to 6.85. So that's setting our lower and upper limits based on the data. In this case, Mr. Wong, I'm suggesting what an investor is going to look at, and you'll appreciate this, you've been doing this for a while, there are factors of value. Value is driven by a number of factors, including all the things we list there. So certainly in my 25 years of experience, I've been told multiple times by property managers and owners, when you've got multiple things, you've got a whole lot more to try and maintain, and it's just not an ideal situation. When you've got a 1-to-1 parking ratio and people are parking on the street, that's all well and good if they don't have a lot of choice. But if you've got a market that is where more supply is coming on the market, these things are going to start to be a problem. They're going to start to be, okay, the size is a positive, but the supply and demand is a negative for the reasons I suggested. So there's no math behind it, Mr. Wong. It's based on, I'd suggest, a very good knowledge of the factors of value that investors and owners look at. And a 25-point change based on looking at all that, I believe is, in my opinion, and that's what it is, it's my opinion, I believe that's very fair. But there is no specific science or math, and I'd suggest to you if someone was trying to do that, it would be impossible. There's not enough data to do that kind of quantification.
Okay. And like with regards to say supply and demand, would your cap rate sales not have been affected by those, or?
Certainly the cap rate sales are contained within that environment. They're in 19, 20, and 2021. Sorry, one's in 18 and one's in 19, one's in 20, and one's in 21. Actually, sorry, I should correct that, December of 20. So they are indeed operating in that environment. But don't forget, Mr. Wong, I'm at a cap rate of 5.75%. That's sort of in the middle of those. And also, please bear in mind, this property being located where it was, the departments received the information from the owner talking about the concerns due to COVID in these economic conditions. And it was certainly, I'd suggest, a very significant risk on the durability of income. So absolutely, they're all operating in the same market. They're in the same economic market and same economic conditions. They're not located by the university and subject to the peculiar things that were happening here.
Okay. And oh, okay, I guess sorry, back to page 5. The largest building that you have has 32 suites.
Indeed, yeah.
Which is it's just a little bit lower than what the subject property is at 90 suites.
They're all, admittedly, Mr. Wong, they're all much smaller. And yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that would be all my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Davidson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchings?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Reimer, I'm looking at page 10 of your brief.
The main.
I believe in the summary, there's a revision required for the
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hutchings. Mr. Chairman, can I ask the board members to turn to page, and Mr. Wong, if we could turn to page 10 of our main brief. There is, Mr. Hutchings, you have a good eye. I've forgotten about this. There is a reference to 244. Add some, please, in whatever method you want to use. Stroke that address out and put in the subject at 70 Baylor.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the page, your adjustments you applied on page 7 for the vacancy rate, I guess you've made a minor adjustment on the cap rate request for an increase. My question is, would this property have received any COVID assistance from the government to offset the impact of COVID on their vacancy rate?
So if one turns to, where is it? To the, oh, there we go. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask the board members and Mr. Hutchings to turn to page 20. This is the income and expense mailer that was sent out on October 31st of 2020. And to answer your question, Mr. Hutchings, and you recall I was saying this is a very sophisticated owner, and they are, any income that would have been received, whether it's from tenants or government subsidies, would all be reflected in line 105 which is on the left-hand column on that page. The total number shown there is 1,268,557, and that would have been inclusive of all income sources except for laundry, which they list separately, and some very small miscellaneous income.
Okay, so my question is, did they receive any subsidies that you're aware of?
It will be, if they did, it's included in that number.
Okay, I guess I should say support. It's not subsidy, but yeah, okay, thank you. And my last question, So in summary, I'm going to go to your workup on page 9.
Yes.
So to summarize, you're using the actual net operating income of the subject property.
Well, not actual, we're using stabilized, which is higher than the 2020 actual.
Yeah, sorry, stabilized. That's correct. Yeah, okay. And then applying a cap rate of 5.75%. And then in summary, you're requesting a decrease in assessment of a little over 1% or $282,000. Is that correct?
Actually, it would be 1% would be 120,000. So I'm guessing it's closer to 3, is it not? Maybe I'm doing the math wrong.
Okay.
2.3. Ms. Davidson said it's 2.3, and I think that I imagine is exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So about approximately 2% plus a little bit. By IAAO standards, is that an acceptable variance for valuation?
We don't, Mr. Hutchings, we don't refer to IAAO standards with respect to the variation. The municipal board's commented on it in the past.
Okay.
We have tolerance, but certainly my experience over the past several, that decision's many years old. Our experience has been certainly working with the department that if we believe sincerely a reduction is warranted, whether it's 2%, 10%, or something different, we certainly are, very forthright in presenting that. The difficulty, of course, is 2.3% difference in value. The taxpayer's got to pay the taxes as is, and they can't make an adjustment of 2.3% on their own because they think the value is lower. So,
fair. Okay.
Your question is fair, Mr. Hutchings, but I'd suggest you, especially when you're talking that the value here suggested is about $300,000 in value. So, I mean, it adds up to a few $1,000s in tax savings should the board agree with it.
Okay. No, that's no, that's the value you're coming up with. Okay. That's my only questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. Mr. Wong, do you wish to summarize?
I think there was some rebuttal that I presented, which we didn't go through.
You are submitting rebuttal?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna put that into the board.
Okay.
I just emailed to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
It's in the share folder, Mr. Hutchings.
I do not have it yet.
Okay, let me come up shortly. So the very top,
Okay.
just below the introduction, 22, 25, 40, A&T rebuttal.
I don't
I
have it. Yeah.
You got it, Ms. Davidson?
I did get it. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
It came in at the top.
Okay.
What would would it be standard on verification and adjustment of sales?
No, it's just a rebuttal for Altus cap rate study is the name of the document.
No, it's 22, 25, 40, A&T rebuttal. I just rename it with a file name.
Yeah, it's applicant's rebuttal.
It's the second last document from the top, Mr. Hutchings. Oh, the second from the top.
Yes, no. Is it 2540?
Yeah, 25, 40, A&T rebuttal.
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, all good to go. Thank you.
Mr. Wong,
Okay, if you, I guess, also, can you open up the Altus cap rate study? And go to page 40.
Okay, I'm there.
Is everyone else there?
Yes.
So you can see this, the cap rate is 6.85%. It's based off of a pro forma. The pro forma are, I guess, in my experience, they're kind of very rough estimates of certain things. You can see that the utilities, the repair and maintenance, the wages and benefits, they're estimated. So this 6.85% is based off of, I would say, a kind of a rough estimate of their operating income. If you go to my rebuttal document, on the very first page, if you look at 535 Victor, you have a sale price of $1,135,000. The Altus indicated cap rate is 6.85%, but we looked at the actual performance for those years prior to the sale, and we calculated a cap rate of 3.19%. And if you go to page 3, the 3.19% that we calculated is based off of the income and expenses for this property. So I guess, does everyone just sort of see the calculation for our 3.19%?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, if you go back to my page 1. I guess looking at 535 Corden, Altus calculated cap rate of 5.73%, and we calculated a cap rate of 5.74%. For Grant, Altus calculated at 5.5, and we calculated 4.46. For 677 Maryland, we're similar. For 32 Arden, Altus calculated 5.42%, and we calculated 5.05%. And that information is in the pages in the following pages of the rebuttal. I guess my point being that the cap rates that were calculated from Altus, we calculate cap rates that are a little bit lower than what Altus is indicating, and so that's the summation for my rebuttal.
Mr. Reimer.
So a couple of things. And I forgot, I said I was going to do this before and I didn't, because I know the department's got a concern with 535 Victor being post reference. So, you know what, I'm going to do that summary. There's a document here that shows the sale date I'm referring to, and I forgot to allude to it. I'm going to do that. I'll ask questions first. So, Mr. Wong, looking now, I'm referring to your rebuttal document. So on your page 3, then the city's calculated a cap rate of 3.19%. That's based upon the sale price divided by the NOI of 36,207, correct? Or the sale price divided by this for the NOI divided by the sale price, but the NOI the department's derived is 36,207 or 208.
Yes.
Okay. That NOI, then if you go up that column, is the department really assuming a valuation based on a vacancy rate of 29.35% to calculate a cap? Is that what you're suggesting?
Looking, if you look at the bottom, unfortunately, I do not know how to rotate my document.
You control shift and then plus or minus, and you'll be able to turn it.
In Word?
Oh, sorry, that's in Adobe. I don't know in Word, sorry.
Yeah, rotate. Okay, I'm going to try to read this sideways. The difference between the City of Winnipeg stabilized and Altus stabilized. Altus stabilized utilizes a realtor pro forma that differs significantly from the reported actuals. Sales was final on land titles after the reference date, and that's not admissible. But the prolonged vacancy issue, not tied to historical renovation, MLS ad indicates that the same potential rent, 151,000, as the historical income and expense mailers. So it just sort of seems like that's the way that this property is performing, and this is the indicated cap rate.
So again, Mr. Wong, just to be clear, the department is suggesting that a vacancy rate of 29.55% is appropriate to apply in a cap rate in this case as a valuation factor.
I guess I'm not going to say whether it's appropriate or not. It has consistent income for several years, and this is what the calculated cap rate is. And it's different than what Altus has calculated.
It most certainly is. We've applied a stabilized vacancy allowance of 7.5%. I guess, Mr. Wong, my last question, because this is surprising. Have you ever, based on your knowledge or your colleagues in this field, have you ever applied a 30%, near enough 30% vacancy allowance when either developing your model or deriving a cap rate? Or is this the first time? I've never seen it, so I'm asking if you've ever seen it before.
I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you alluded to 1139 grant, Mr. Wong, but again, be clear that we're removing that, right? Like we're not, we've heard you and we're agreeing it should be removed. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to refer to the post reference, and I understand where Mr. Wong's coming from. I want to address that, but perhaps I'll do that in summation.
Okay,
Thank you. So my questions. Rebuttal.
thank you. Ms. Davidson,
I have no questions.
thank you. Mr. Hutchins?
No questions, thank you.
All right. Mr. Wong, summation if you so desire.
Yeah, I guess regarding the cap rate, it's just I feel that our cap rates are supported, and I ask that you confirm the assessed value.
Thank you. Mr. Reimer?
Only summation is going to be just the comment I'm talking about. Could I ask the board members and Mr. Wong, please, to turn, it's our cap rate study now, to turn to page 43. And I'll if you don't want to bother, I can just refer to the page number and I'll tell you what it says. The list date for this is 535 acre. And this is the one where the department's rightly saying it didn't go through the untitled till June 21, make post reference. No disputing that. But if and when you go to page 43, the list date for the property was October of 2020. The important thing here, the sell date. The sell date is December 17th, 2020. That is the date that on that day, the agent would have, the offer to purchase was accepted. The deal was done and the deal was available on Matrix. So again, I alluded to earlier, it's similar to when you are searching, for information on land titles. All the agents in this province and the clients of the agents, if they ask them for this information, would have access to the sale price. So I with respect, I don't consider it to be post-reference. The transaction was completed in December, on December 17th, 2020, when the offer was accepted. And that, I believe, is the relevant piece. Thank you very much for listening.
Just one quick clarification, I guess, Mr. Reimer. Yeah, why is it post? It's not post reference, but what's
the sale date is not post reference. It's in December 2020. But this, and the reason I can speak so clearly about this is actually we sold our house a little while ago. We had a possession date that was a year after our sale date. Similarly here, this was a case where the offer to purchase, it was a listed property. The offer to purchase was drafted, it was accepted, and that's the relevant date. That's the date on which all of the information goes into the real estate board's records. That's the information that's available to every member of the real estate board and is accessible by the client through asking their agent. In the same way that if you, in a normal transaction, if the property had gone through land titles the next day you could also go to land titles and get the sale information from the title transfer. In this case, though, same thing as with my house, you've got a possession date that's actually quite far removed from the date on which the property actually sold. But the operative date for our purposes, I suggest, is actually the sale date. That's when it became known. The offer is accepted. What was the selling price? It was the price shown on Matrix, which is the real estate.
So there's a difference. I mean, like I'm a little confused because it's normally possession date and then when it clears land titles. So,
but there's two different things. Don't forget. Usually, the possession date is within a reasonably short period of time, right?
Yeah.
But it never detracts from the fact that the information is to the sale price. The time when the property transacts, for the purposes of the reference I just made, is the date on which the offer is accepted. So that then is a binding contract of sale. It's got all the figures, the sale price and such, and it's fully available to the real estate board. It's discoverable through that process. So that one, I don't remember, I'm going to call it 1.135 million. That was known as a fact in December of 2020, notwithstanding that the actual transfer that would have been submitted based on that sale was 6 months later. Same thing was my house. So my house sold, actually, in my example, my house sold in June of the year prior to the year that we gave possession. It was nearly 12 months later. But that transaction.
so how is it reported in MLS?
It's shown in the example. In my example, it was shown as sold in May of the year prior.
Of the year prior.
Just like it is on that
But
paper.
by the time it clears land titles, it's a year.
It's exact. That's
Okay.
right. That's right.
So, any sales, that are going through, that are way past, but the MLS should show the date that it was sold.
Exactly.
Okay.
It will
Not
show-
possession date.
Not possession date. Okay, it's the date it sells.
Okay.
Which is, of course, the most relevant thing.
Yeah.
We're looking at this. Bang on,
So MLS reports it as such.
right on that date
Okay.
in December.
Whether it be residential or whether it be commercial.
Yeah. Okay. Same. It's reported when the deal is actually done. Okay. Same thing.
I think we've concluded with you.
Thank you very much.
So let me just, we've heard everything on the schedule this morning, and this hearing is officially adjourned. And thank you, Mr. Reimer, for your presentation and results. As you probably know, will come shortly.
Thank you very much.
So thank you.
Have a good day, y'all.
You too.
Bye, Carrie.
Bye.